Catus Maximus here, this time with a little video of this Walden 1150. So I've actually done one other Walden Ratchet review, and that was the 1160. And it was an okay ratchet. Walden tools were always kind of mid-grade. They were never trying to be snap-on. But the 1160 wasn't really great. It had a pretty bad press-fit reverse lever. And like this, the 1160, like this 1150, that 1160 I reviewed did have a fair amount of anvil play, but that's something we can fix up with the washer, and I'll show that. I ran into this Walden, the 1150, so it's just a previous model to the one that I already reviewed, and the big difference is, if you look at that video, is this one has I-beam construction, so it's definitely an older unit. It's also better made than that newer one. And the most obvious thing is the reverse knob is this machine piece of steel screwed into the pawl, not some stamp deal that's swaged. So you can totally take apart this ratchet. And it's a dial. It has a pretty decent ball detent. And it's just kind of interesting having a dial reverse knob. Those are very rare, regardless of how old the ratchet is. Almost never do you see those. I have a little tiny 1/4-inch Meteor ratchet which has a dial. And this Walden is one of the only other, I know there's been a few made, but it is particularly rare. I do like this better just because it's a little bit nicer being a machine piece of steel. It's actually not very hard to activate just because we do have some really nice knurling there, nice and deep, easily able to get a lot of grip on that. When you're using a ratchet like this, one advantage of the dial is if you get a fastener loose and you're just quickly running it out like this, even having your hand on top of the ratchet, it interferes less because this is just a circular, so as long as you don't put too much pressure, you can just easily grab the head of the ratchet and run a fastener out, in or out, much more quickly without running into issues of interfering with the pawl and having it get stuck, or the lever I should say, or accidentally bumping the lever and reversing it. So I kind of like that fact. And this style is pretty heavy duty since it sits flush with the ratchet body. Even though it protrudes a lot, if you drop it or something like that, it's not such a big deal. We can see that it has a through post, so this pawl is supported on both sides. Anyway, let's take a quick look inside this unit here. And I take apart old cordless drills every once in a while, and they have a bunch of these shim washers. I can see that I'm going to have to do it this way. This knob is just slightly interfering with that screw. Very tight tolerances, so if you don't want to pull off the knob, then you might do something like this. These screws have not been pulled out for a really long time. That was actually pretty tight because the end of the threads were not in such great condition. Interestingly enough, there's a hole there, and that does allow crud to get in there. But the idea is that it's pretty easy to oil. The reason I'm having such issues is because the screws are a little bit too long, and over the years the very end of the threads have gotten a little bit damaged, making it just slightly more difficult to get this apart. As soon as we get it apart, this is really coarse. This is like a 24 tooth or something like that. Anyway, there's a little pawl, and then here is our ratchet wheel. So we have a couple of options for actually getting this fixed up. So, as we can see, it's flat on the back. It has actually an undercut. Nicely machined parts though, pretty even teeth. It's only a single tooth pawl, but this type of Williams design is pretty robust. And the other Walden I reviewed, somebody had used a cheater bar on it, and it actually still ran just fine, but upon taking it apart you could see where one of the teeth had been really stretched over, but it still held up. A little billet machined pawl there. So anyway, all I have to do is dig up a washer, and I really have two options. Either I may have one which will just fit on there but not be too wide. If I don't, since it's flat on the back, I may be able to find another one that goes on the inside. So this was what I was able to dig up for washers. These random washers get our cordless drills. I've actually found many ratchets to use them in. They just happen to be just a weird confluence where you need weird sized washers that are usually very thin, that have varying internal and external diameters and ring thicknesses. And in this case, this is really good. It's not larger diameter than the teeth, fits around the anvil. Kind of like the idea of putting it on the front because it kind of pushes the anvil further back into the ratchet. And that, and with how much play it has, this ring is probably about 0.010 of an inch thick, but it's going to be just right, to tell you the truth, considering that this ratchet had so much play in it. Actually, the anvil had so much slop, I went and found another washer to put in the back, and now we got it tightened up. So, kind of evidence of Walden's tools that they just, I mean, a lot of ratchets have a amount of play, but the Waldens definitely had a lot. But overall, they weren't too bad. And this earlier 1150 versus the 1160 that I reviewed, this one is definitely nicer. Kind of like the more classic I-beam design. Like the reverse knob, even though I didn't have any washers, I was noticing that there's quite a bit of slop in there too. But it's not really such a big deal. It's more of a big deal just trying to get this anvil tightened up a little bit. Just so it doesn't wobble around quite as much. The other thing about having an anvil that's pretty tight in a ratchet is if the anvil's cantered off at an angle, then what ends up happening is since the ratchet has teeth in it, if it's cantered off at an angle like this, and what ends up happening is only a portion of the pawl is engaging. So if you keep the pawl real straight, just like gears, and keep the anvil real straight, then that makes sure that the entire surface area of the pawl is engaging, and makes for a stronger ratchet. So that's that's the real reason I like doing it. It isn't just to make it tighter and to be retentive, but it actually does make it a better ratchet. Anyway, I ended up giving away my old, both of my old sheet metal lever Waldens, but I think I'll keep this one because this is actually a nicer unit. And it's unfortunate that Walden was cheapifying their tools, and this was happening this is probably from the 1960s, and the one that I reviewed was probably from the 1160s, probably from the 1970s. So this is more than half a century ago that Walden was, you know, not the most competitive tool manufacturer and was cheaping out their tools, and that was unfortunate because this one, as simple as it is with a single pawl and like 24 teeth, really isn't such a bad ratchet, especially now that we got the anvil tightened up. Really do like that reverse lever. That is pretty unique. This is one of only 2 ratchets I own that have the dial type reverse. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Till next time, Catus Maximus out.